Hey everyone, welcome back. Since the last video where we talked about model context protocol in general, about why it is, what's its use, why it was built up, came up with, why Anthropic came up with MCP. Um, we also talked about MCP servers. Yeah, so that's what we talked about how MCPs have a client server architecture, and we were focusing on the MCP server. We did not, I don't remember mentioning it clearly, but essentially MCP servers, the main three capabilities of MCP servers are tools, prompts, and resources. These are the three main capabilities. And we started with exploring the tools. We created one single tool that was able to add two given numbers, right? That's where we stopped off the last video. So in this video, we'll just continue on from there. And explore another capability, a new capability of MCP servers, which is resources. Now, before getting into like the plan for the day, first let's talk a bit about MCP resources. So very briefly, MCP resources is just a way of sharing additional context with the MCP client LLM agent, right? About using structured data, content, data, whatever. Now, resources can be of two types. They can be static resources or they can be template resources. Static resources, just to give you an example from some of my previous work, static resources look somewhat like this. They're not parameterized. Essentially, it's all hard coded, right? Template resources, on the other hand, allows you to pass resources in a parameterized manner. So for example, and we'll look into this probably in the next video, not in this video, you will see that we have a wildcard parameter here, user ID, which we are passing in to get, obviously we'll see that later, but we are getting like corresponding user details from that resource. Now, one of the things I want you to remember when designing MCP server resources is that resources cannot be computationally expensive. They have to be very uh, minimally time consuming, right? Like they cannot take too long to run. Latency has to be minimal. There has to be like almost zero computational complexity, all that stuff, right? Like resource, a good way to think about resources is thinking of it analogous, similar to the GET requests, right? Just like how GET requests are just requests that are designed to pull data, not do anything with them. They are just like sources of data, right? Like you don't really, as part of the GET request, you do not work with the data as such. You do not do any data engineering, you do not reshape the data or anything. It just goes in and pulls the data from the source and returns the data. Similarly, resources are the exact same thing. They do not care about where the data is stored. Could be a file, could be a web page, could be a database table, whatever. You pass in the corresponding URL, the path. For a file it would be file path, for a web page it would be the web URL, for a database table it would be the DB database path, connection, whatever it would be, and it would get the corresponding details. But the important thing to keep in mind is that your resource should only be just that, a source of data. It is not a tool to manipulate data as such. It is only a source of data. So let's get on with the video now. Enough discussions, enough talking. Let's start with the tool. Let's start with creating a new tool. So as you can see, this is what we had yesterday, right? We had this test server, we had a single tool. So I have this tool copied. So the new tool that we are going to create is a Fibonacci tool, right? Like it takes in an integer n, and then it outputs the Fibonacci sequence of the length n, right? So I'll just paste it quickly, and let's quickly go over the function. Yeah, again, like you can see, the description is descriptive, and this is again very important. The better descriptions you have for your tools, resources, and prompts, the better the LLM client would know how to use them. I'll probably keep saying this over and over again throughout the video series, but this is an important point to keep in mind. So yeah, as you can see, it talks about like Fibonacci generator. It gives some examples, now providing some examples in the descriptions, or even later we'll talk about in the MCP server prompts. Those have shown, like we have seen that providing examples can improve MCP performances because it already has some understanding of what to do with like prevalent examples, right? Yeah, and then we talk about like some of the some other details, and then yeah, we just have the function, right? We just say that yeah, if n is equal to less than equal to 0, if length of the series is 0, return an empty series. If the length is 1, then return 0. If length is 2, then return 0 1, and if it is more than 2, then add the first two integers and then come, or rather the last two integers, and then come up with the next integer. And that's essentially the function. So let's just again quickly test it. So before first we check if the function, if our server is starting up. So we do ub run python test server.py, and we see that our server is running. So there is no code issues, no syntax issues, nothing to be worried about. So let's now go forward with using our inspector tool that I showed yesterday, to see if the new tool is being captured, right? So if everything works well, what we can do is we run pmetui, that will open up the tool. And now if we connect to the test MCP server and check tools, we see we have two tools, right, which is the expected. Now again, like we already checked this before, but again, if you see raw interactions, the first thing in an MCP, when the server connects with the client requests the server the list of prompts, resources, including both static and template, and prompts or tools, which and the data that is returned by the server about the prompts, resources, tools tells the client exactly how to use the MCP server and all its components. And that is why the description is so important, right? Like this process clearly demonstrates why the description is so important. So that's there, and then if you check the notifications, you'll see that yeah, it connected to the MCP server successfully, right? So let's go back to the tools, and then let's we already tested the AB tool. We can just test it again. So we can pass in 2 and 4 execute tool. We'll see that it comes up with 6. If we see the raw interactions, we see that the tools call method was called. Add numbers was the actual name of the MCP tool that was used, and then it used the 2 and 4 as parameters to get back 6. Now let's try the other tool, right? We have Fibonacci. So let's pass in 5, right? And let's press execute tool, and it comes up with the series 0 1 1 2 3, right? And then if we check raw interactions, again same, it calls a tool. The name of the tool is the Fibonacci, and it passes in the tool argument, which is n, and we are using 5 here, and it passes that in, and it gets back the series 0 1 1 2 3 from the server. So that's how we already explored this. So we now remember how to use the inspector tool as well. So that is correct. So now let's quit it, and what we'll do is start working on resources. Now what you could do is like you could just immediately add the resource in the template, or rather in the server file itself. What I'll do is like I'll create a separate resource directory, just for clarity, right? So I'll create this new folder, test resources, or rather just resources, right? And then let's create a not new folder, new file, init.py. I think I'll have to, yeah, underscore init, rename, and then we'll have to add the first resource, right? And let's just keep it consistent, resource 1 static info.py. So new file, and like again, like I'm just keeping it consistent so that if I like start copying anything from my previous work, like it stays consistent and it doesn't throw any errors. That's it. Feel free to do any names, of course. So resource 1 static info.py. So let's first, so as you can see, like I'm already saying this is a static resource. what we'll do is like very simple. We'll just have some hard-coded data here, and the resource will just return this data, right? So let's do just that. Let's just copy the resource from here, and then we'll go over the resource together. So what does it say? It says resource one static server information. So it is basically talking about the MCP server that we are building, right? The URI for the resources server info, which I'm passing here, and it is static. No parameters need to be passed. That's which is what we're exploring in this video, right? So yeah, and then you can see it's basically just returning the result. Print debug get server info called. This is the result, and then it is printing the result. That's it, and it follows good resource practices in the sense that it is not computationally expensive. There is no complicated code here, and it is simply doing a data call. Like it's the tool is being called, the URL is being accessed, and it is getting the data. That's it. I'll just quickly remove some of this because we don't really have all these things added yet. So once we start adding them, we will add them, but now let's remove them, right? So now we see the server has two tools, Fibonacci and add numbers, which is what we have seen, and it has one resource, server info. And this server info should basically, when we call this resource, it should basically return this dictionary basically, right? Let's save this. Now we need to incorporate this resource into our server.py. Now what I'll do is like I'll use the init.py to do this. The idea being once we start using more resources, it would just be easier to use the init.py as the point of access to like explore all the resources at a single glance. So yeah, I'll just use the init.py thing. So let's first, we'll just again like copy over this. Most of this stuff is already prepared, so we'll copy over a bunch of this stuff, and I'll be talking about what we are doing. All right, so our init file is now ready. So at a glance, like you can just go through it and get an idea of the entire module. And again, like this does not look super useful right now when we just have one resource, but when we start having multiple resources, this will prove to be more helpful. So yeah, as you can see, I'm just registering all the resources here. So I have right now one resource, so that's the one that I'm pulling from, registering that, and I have a function which then registers all the resources together. And once that is done, like it's basically returning the dictionary which contains all the registered resources. This function register all resources would then we'll like basically call it in test server.py, right? Like we'll just import it from resources, import register all resources, and then yeah, we already have the register all resources MCP. So how this is working is our test server.py is calling the register all resources, which it is importing from the resources module because it is already defined in init.py. And register all resources, if we check init.py, is registering all the individual, registering in the sense that it is calling all the individual resources, like register resource functions. And if you check the register resource functions, it's nothing but just like the resource definitions, right? That's it. So that's how it is done. Let's save it. Let's now try to run the server itself first. uv run Python test server.py. Okay, so we can already see that one resource was successfully registered, static info, right? So we can close this. Now what we can do is let's run the tool to confirm that we can see and use our resource. So uv run So now let's try connecting to the test MCP server, connect. And now you see we have a resource, which is what we were looking for, right? So if we click on the resource and if we try to read the resource, So you can see that the file has been saved here. Now if we check the, let's try and opening the file. Let's see. Okay, it's saying MCP Resource XO SSO, right? So this is so DM get server info. Yeah, so you can see this dictionary was the one that we had in our code here, right? Like exactly same thing, and that's what's being passed. But imagine this, like when you have a real world product, the client connects to the server and the server immediately gets back to the client saying that, yeah, I have a get server info resource, which then the client could potentially call to get information about the client, to again like get in a concise view, like what are the tools, what are the resources, any other information you want to inform the client immediately about the MCP server. So yeah, this is potentially, yeah, this is a very common tool, but this is I feel like a good static resource, sorry, not tool, resource, and yeah, this is a good static resource to start things with. I'll be ending the video here today. It's a slightly longer video than the last time, and then in the next video we'll continue with resources, but we'll explore template resources. So resources where we can pass in parameterized resources and that way access different file paths, URLs, schema detail table, DB table schema details dynamically, bringing more power to our MCP server. That's it. Thank you, everyone. Again, like feel free to answer your, or rather ask your questions in the comment section. I'll try to address them as much as I can. And yeah, cheers. Talk to you guys later. Bye.